22. Therefore, those whom fortune favors are warned that riches do not bring freedom from sorrow and are of no avail for eternal happiness, but rather are obstacles, that the rich should tremble at the threatening of Jesus Christ, threatening so unwonted in the mouth of our Lord, and that a most strict account must be given to the Supreme Judge for all we possess. The chief and most excellent rule for the right use of money is one the heathen philosophers hinted at, but which the Church has traced out clearly, and has not only made known to men's minds, but has impressed upon their lives. It rests on the principle that it is one thing to have a right to the possession of money, and another to have a right to use money as one wills. Private ownership, as we have seen, is the natural right of man, and to exercise that right, especially as members of society, is not only lawful, but absolutely necessary. It is lawful, says St. Thomas Aquinas, for a man to hold private property, and it is also necessary for the carrying on of human existence. But if the question be asked, how must one's possessions be used? The Church replies without hesitation in the words of the same holy doctor: man should not consider his material possessions as his own, but as common to all, so as to share them without hesitation when others are in need. Whence the Apostle with command the rich of this world to offer with no stint to apportion largely. True, no one is commanded to distribute to others that which is required for his own needs and those of his household, nor even to give away what is reasonably required to keep up becomingly his condition in life, for no one ought to live other than becomingly. But when what necessity demands has been supplied, and one's standing fairly taken thought for, it becomes a duty to give to the indigent out of what remains over. Of that which remaineth give alms. It is a duty, not of justice, save in extreme cases, but of Christian charity, a duty not enforced by human law. But the laws and judgments of men must yield place to the law and judgment of Christ, the true God, who in many ways urges on his followers the practice of almsgiving. It is more blessed to give than to receive, and who will count a kindness done or refused to the poor as done or refused to himself. As long as you did it to one of the least brethren, you did it to me. To sum up, then, what has been said, whoever has received from the divine bounty a large share of temporal blessings, whether they be external and material, or gifts of the mind, has received them for the purpose of using them for the perfecting of his own nature, and, at the same time, that he may employ them as the steward of God's providence, for the benefit of others. He that hath a talent, says St. Gregory the Great, let him see that he hide it not. He that hath abundance, let him quicken himself to mercy and generosity. He that hath art and skill, let him do his best to share the use and the utility hereof with his neighbor. 23. As for those who possess not the gift of fortune, they are taught by the Church that in God's sight poverty is no disgrace, and that there is nothing to be ashamed of in earning their bread by labor. This is enforced by what we see in Christ himself, who, whereas he was rich, for our sakes became poor, and who, being the Son of God, and God himself, chose to seem and to be considered the son of a carpenter, nay, did not disdain to spend a great part of his life as a carpenter himself. Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary? 24. From contemplation of this divine model, it is more easy to understand that the true worth and nobility of man lie in his moral qualities, that is, in virtue. That virtue is, moreover, the common inheritance of men, equally within the reach of high and low, rich and poor, and that virtue, and virtue alone, wherever found, will be followed by the rewards of everlasting happiness. Nay, God himself seems to incline rather to those who suffer misfortune, for Jesus Christ calls the poor blessed. He lovingly invites those in labor and grief to come to him for solace, and he displays the tenderest charity towards the lowly and the oppressed. These reflections cannot fail to keep down the pride of the well-to-do, and to give heart to the unfortunate, to move the former to be generous and the latter to be moderate in their desires. Thus, the separation which pride would set up tends to disappear, nor will it be difficult to make rich and poor join hands in friendly concord. 25. But if Christian precepts prevail, the respective classes will not only be united in the bonds of friendship, but also in those of brotherly love, for they will understand and feel that all men are children of the same common Father, who is God, that all have alike the same last end, which is God himself, who alone can make either men or angels absolutely and perfectly happy, that each and all are redeemed and made sons of God by Jesus Christ, the firstborn among many brethren, that the blessings of nature and the gifts of grace belong to the whole human race in common, and that from none except the unworthy is withheld the inheritance of the kingdom of heaven. If sons, heirs also, heirs indeed of God and co-heirs with Christ. Such is the scheme of duties and of rights which is shown forth to the world by the gospel. Would it not seem that, were society penetrated with ideas like these, strife would quickly cease? 26. But the Church, not content with pointing out the remedy, also applies it. For the Church does her utmost to teach and to train men, and to educate them, and by the intermediary of her bishops and clergy diffuses her salutary teachings far and wide. She strives to influence the minds and the hearts, so that all may willingly yield themselves to be formed and guided by the commandment of God. It is precisely in this fundamental and momentous matter, on which everything depends, that the Church possesses a power peculiarly her own. The instruments which she employs are given to her by Jesus Christ himself for the very purpose of reaching the hearts of men, and drive their efficacy from God. They alone can reach the innermost heart and conscience, and bring men to act from a motive of duty, to control their passions and appetites, to love God and their fellow men with a love that is outstanding and of the highest degree, and to break down courageously every barrier which blocks the way to virtue. 27. On this subject we need but recall for one moment the examples recorded in history. Of these facts there cannot be any shadow of a doubt. For instance, that civil society was renovated in every part by Christian institutions, that in the strength of that renewal the human race was lifted up to better things, nay, that it was brought back from death to life, in so excellent a life that nothing more perfect had been known before, or will come to be known in the ages that have yet to be. Of this beneficent transformation Jesus Christ was at once the first cause and the final end. As from him all came, so to him was all to be brought back. For when the human race, by the light of the gospel message, came to know the grand mystery of the incarnation of the Word and the redemption of man, at once the life of Jesus Christ, God and man, pervaded every race and nation, and interpenetrated them with his faith, his precepts, and his laws. And if human society is to be healed now, in no other way can it be healed save by a return to Christian life and Christian institutions. When a society is perishing, the wholesome advice to give to those who would restore it is to call it to the principles from which it sprang. For the purpose and perfection of an association is to aim at and to attain that for which it is formed, and its efforts should be put in motion and inspired by the end and object which originally gave it being. Hence, to fall away from its primal constitution implies disease, to go back to it, recovery. And this may be asserted with utmost truth both of the whole body of the Commonwealth, and of that class of its citizens, by far the great majority, who get their living by their labor. 28. Neither must it be supposed that the solicitude of the Church is so preoccupied with the spiritual concerns of her children as to neglect their temporal and earthly interests. Her desire is that the poor, for example, should rise above poverty and wretchedness, and better their condition in life, and for this she makes a strong endeavor, by the fact that she calls men to virtue and forms them to its practice. She promotes this in no slight degree. Christian morality, when adequately and completely practiced, leads of itself to temporal prosperity, for it merits the blessing of that God who is the source of all blessings. It powerfully restrains the greed of possession and the thirst for pleasure, twin plagues, which too often make a man who is void of self-restraint miserable in the midst of abundance. It makes men supply for the lack of means through economy, teaching them to be content with frugal living, and further keeping them out of the reach of those vices which devour not small incomes merely, but large fortunes, and dissipate many a good inheritance. 29. The Church, moreover, intervenes directly in behalf of the poor, by setting on foot and maintaining many associations which she knows to be efficient for the relief of poverty. Herein, again, She has always succeeded so well as to have even extorted the praise of her enemies. Such was the ardor of brotherly love amongst the early Christians, that numbers of those who were in better circumstances despoiled themselves of their possessions in order to relieve their brethren. Whence, neither was there anyone needy among them. To the order of deacons, instituted in that very intent, was committed by the apostles the charge of the daily doles. And the apostle Paul, through burdened journeys in order to carry the alms of the faithful to the poorest Christians. Tertullian calls these contributions, given voluntarily by Christians in their assemblies, deposits of piety, because, to cite his own words, they were employed in feeding the needy, in burying them, in support of youths and maidens destitute of means and deprived of their parents, in the care of the aged, and the relief of the shipwrecked. 30. Thus, by degrees came into existence the patrimony which the Church has guarded with religious care as the inheritance of the poor. Nay, in order to spare them the shame of begging, the Church has provided aid for the needy. The common mother of rich and poor has aroused everywhere the heroism of charity, and has established congregations of religious and many other useful institutions for help and mercy, so that hardly any kind of suffering could exist which was not afforded relief. At the present day many there are who, like the heathen of old, seeks to blame and condemn the Church for such eminent charity. They would substitute in its stead a system of relief organized by the state. But no human expedients will ever make up for the devotedness and self-sacrifice of Christian charity. Charity as a virtue pertains to the Church, for a virtue it is not, unless it be drawn from the most sacred heart of Jesus Christ, and whosoever turns his back on the Church cannot be near to Christ. 31. It cannot, however, be doubted that to attain the purpose we are treating of, not only the Church, but all human agencies must concur. All who are concerned in the matter should be of one mind, and according to their ability act together. It is with this, as with Providence that governs the world. The results of causes do not usually take place save where all the causes cooperate. It is sufficient, therefore, to inquire what part the state should play in the work of remedy and relief. 32. By the state we here understand, not the particular form of government prevailing in this or that nation, but the state as rightly apprehended, that is to say, any government conformable in its institutions to right reason and natural law, and to those dictates of the divine wisdom which we have expounded in the encyclical on the Christian constitution of the state. The foremost duty, therefore, of the rulers of the state should be to make sure that the laws and institutions, the general character and administration of the commonwealth, shall be such as of themselves to realize public well-being and private prosperity. This is the proper scope of wise statesmanship, and is the work of the rulers. Now a state chiefly prospers and thrives through moral rule, well-regulated family life, respect for religion and justice, the moderation and fair imposing of public taxes, the progress of arts and of trade, the abundant yield of the land through everything, in fact, which makes the citizens better and happier. Hereby, then, it lies in the power of the ruler to benefit every class in the state, and amongst the rest to promote to the utmost the interests of the poor, and this in virtue of his office, and without being open to suspicion of undue interference, since it is the providence of the commonwealth to serve the common good. And the more that is done for the benefit of the working classes by the general laws of the country, the less need will there be to seek for special means to relieve them. 33. There is another and deeper consideration which must not be lost sight of, as regards the state. The interest of all, whether high or low, are equal. The members of the working classes are citizens by nature and by the same right as the rich. They are real parts, living the life which makes up, through the family, the body of the commonwealth, and it need hardly be said that they are in every sight very largely in the majority. It would be irrational to neglect one portion of the citizens in favor of another, and therefore the public administration must duly and solicitously provide for the welfare and the comfort of the working classes. Otherwise that law of justice will be violated, which ordains that each man shall have his due. to cite the wise words of St. Thomas Aquinas. As the part of the whole are in a certain sense identical, so that which belongs to the whole in a sense belongs to the part. Among many and grave duties of rulers who would do their best for the people, the first and chief is to act with strict justice, with that justice which is called distributive, toward each and every class alike. 34. But although all citizens without exception can and ought to contribute to that common good in which individuals share so advantageously to themselves, yet it should not be supposed that all can contribute in the like way and to the same extent. No matter what changes may occur in form of government, there will ever be differences and inequalities of condition in the state. Society cannot exist or be conceived of without them. Some there must be who devote themselves to the work of the commonwealth, who make the laws or administer justice, or whose advice and authority govern the nation in times of peace and defend it in war. Such men clearly occupy the foremost place in the state, and should be held in highest estimation, for their work concerns most nearly and effectively the general interests of the community. Those who labor at a trade or calling do not promote the general welfare in such measure as this, but they benefit the nation, if less directly, in a most important manner. We have insisted, it is true, that since the end of society is to make men better, the chief good that society can possess is virtue. Nevertheless, it is the business of a well-constituted body politic to see to the provision of those materials and external helps, the use of which is necessary to virtuous action. Now for the provision of such commodities, the labor of the working class, the exercise of their skill, and the employment of their strength in the cultivation of land, and in the workshops of trade, is especially responsible and quite indispensable. Indeed, their cooperation is in this respect so important that it may be truly said that it is only by the labor of working men that states grow rich. Justice, therefore, demands that the interests of the working classes should be carefully watched over by the administration, so that they who contribute so largely to the advantage of the community may themselves share in the benefits which they create, that being housed, clothed, and bodily fit, they may find their life less hard and more endurable. It follows that whatever shall appear to prove conducive to the well-being of those who work should obtain favorable consideration. There is no fear that solicitude of this kind will be harmful to any interest. On the contrary, it will be to the advantage of all, for it cannot be but good for the commonwealth to shield from misery those on whom it so largely depends for the things that it needs. 35. We have said that the state must not absorb the individual or the family. Both should be allowed free and untrammeled action so far as is consistent with the common good and the interests of others. Rulers should, nevertheless, anxiously safeguard the community and all its members. The community, because the conservation thereof is so emphatically the business of the supreme power, that the safety of the commonwealth is not only the first law, but it is government's whole reason of existence, and the members, because both philosophy and the gospel concur in laying down that the object of the government of the state should be, not the advantage of the ruler, but the benefit of those over whom he is placed. As the power to rule comes from God, and is, as it were, a participation in his, the highest of all sovereignties, it should be exercised as the power of God is exercised, with a fatherly solicitude which not only guides the whole, but reaches also individuals. 36. Whenever the general interest or any particular class suffers or is threatened with harm, which can in no other way be met or prevented, the public authority must step in to deal with it. Now it is the interest of the community, as well as that of the individual, that peace and good order should be maintained, that all things should be carried on in accordance with God's law and those of nature, that the discipline of family life should be observed and that religion should be obeyed, that a high standard of morality should prevail, both in public and private life, that justice should be held sacred and that no one should injure another with impunity, that the members of the commonwealth should grow up to man's estate strong and robust, and capable, if need be, of guarding and defending their country. If by a strike of workers or concerted interruption of work there should be imminent danger of disturbance to the public peace, or if circumstances were such as that among the working class the ties of family life were relaxed, if religion were found to suffer through the workers not having time and opportunity afforded them to practice its duties, if in workshops and factories there were dangers of morals through the mixing of the sexes, or from other harmful occasions of evil, or if employers laid burdens upon their workmen which were unjust, or degraded them with conditions repugnant to their dignity as human beings. Finally, if health were endangered by excessive labor or by work unsuited to sex or age. In such cases there can be no question but that, within certain limits, it would be right to invoke the aid and authority of the law. The limits must be determined by the nature of the occasion which calls for the law's interference, the principle being that the law must not undertake more nor proceed further than is required for the remedy of the evil or the removal of the mischief. 37. Rights must be religiously respected wherever they exist, and it is the duty of the public authority to prevent and to punish injury, and to protect every one in the possession of his own. Still, when there is question of defending the rights of individuals, the poor and badly off have a claim to especial consideration. The rich class have many ways of shielding themselves and stand less in need of help from the state, whereas the mass of the poor have no resources of their own to fall back upon, and must chiefly depend upon the assistance of the state. And it is for this reason that wage earners, since they mostly belong to the mass of the needy, should be especially cared for and protected by the government. 38. Here, however, it is expedient to bring under special notice certain matters of moment. First of all, there is the duty of safeguarding private property by legal enactment and protection. Most of all, it is essential, where the passion of greed is so strong, to keep the populace within the line of duty. For if all may justly strive to better their condition, neither justice nor the common good allows any individual to seize upon that which belongs to another, or, under the futile and shallow pretext of equality, to lay violent hands on other people's possessions. Most true it is that by far the larger part of the workers prefer to better themselves by honest labor rather than by doing any wrong to others. But there are not a few who are imbued with evil principles and eager for revolutionary change, whose main purpose it is to stir up disorder and incite their fellows to acts of violence. The authority of the law should intervene to put restraint upon such firebrands, to save the working classes from being led astray by their maneuvers, and to protect lawful owners from spoliation. 39. When work people have recourse to a strike and become voluntarily idle, it is frequently because the hours of labor are too long, or the work too hard, or because they consider their wages insufficient. The grave inconvenience of this not uncommon occurrence should be obviated by public remedial measures, for such paralyzing of labor not only affects the masters and their work people alike, but is extremely injurious to trade and to the general interests of the public. Moreover, on such occasions violence and disorder are generally not far distant, and thus it frequently happens that the public peace is imperiled. The law should forestall and prevent such troubles from arising. They should lend their influence and authority to the removal in good time of the causes which lead to conflicts between employers and employed. 40. The working man too has interests in which he should be protected by the state, and first of all there are the interests of his soul. Life on earth, however good and desirable in itself, is not the final purpose for which man is created. It is only the way and the means to that attainment of truth and that love of goodness in which the full life of the soul consists. It is the soul which is made after the image and likeness of God. It is in the soul that the sovereignty resides, in virtue whereof man is commanded to rule the creatures below him, and to use all the earth and the oceans for his profit and advantage. Fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fishes of the sea and the fowls of the air and all living creatures that move upon the earth. In this respect all men are equal. There is here no difference between rich and poor, master and servant, ruler and ruled. For the same is Lord over all. No man may with impunity outrage that human dignity which God himself treated with great reverence, nor stand in the way of that higher life which is the preparation for the eternal life of heaven. Nay, more. No man has in this matter power over himself. To consent to to any treatment which is calculated to defeat the end and purpose of his being is beyond his right. He cannot give up his soul to servitude, for it is not man's own right which here are in question, but the rights of God, the most sacred and inviolable rights. 41. From this follows the obligation of the cessation of work and labor on Sundays and certain holy days. The rest from labor is not to be understood as a mere giving way to idleness. Much less must it be an occasion for spending money and for vicious indulgence, as many would have it to be. But it should be rest from labor hallowed by religion. Rest, combined with religious observances, disposes man to forget for a while the business of his everyday life, to turn his thoughts to things heavenly, and to worship, which he so strictly owes to the eternal Godhead. It is this, above all, which is the reason and motive of Sunday rest, a rest sanctioned by God's great law of the ancient covenant. Remember, thou keep holy the Sabbath day, and taught to the world by his own mysterious rest after the creation of man. He rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. 42. If we turn not to things external and material, the first things of all to secure is to save unfortunate working people from the cruelty of men of greed, who use human beings as mere instruments for money-making. It is neither just nor human so to grind men down with excessive labor as to stupefy their minds and wear out their bodies. Man's power, like his general nature, are limited, and beyond these limits he cannot go. His strength is developed and increased by use and exercise, but only on condition of due intermission and proper rest. Daily labor, therefore, should be so regulated as not to be protracted over longer hours than strength admits. How many and how long the intervals of rest should be must depend on the nature of the work, on circumstances of time and place, and on the health and strength of the workmen. Those who work in mines and quarries, and extract coal, stone, and metals from the bowels of the earth, should have shorter hours in proportion as their labor is more severe and trying to health. Then again, the season of the year should be taken into account, for not unfrequently a kind of labor is easy at one time which is at another time intolerable or exceedingly difficult. Finally, work which is quite suitable for a strong man cannot rightly be required for a woman or a child. And in regard to children, great care should be taken not to place them in workshops and factories until their bodies and minds are sufficiently developed. For just as very rough weather destroys the buds of spring, so does too early an experience of life's hard toil blight the young promises of a child's faculties, and render any true education impossible. Women, again, are not suited for certain occupations. A woman is by nature fitted for home work, and it is that which is best adapted at once to preserve her modesty and to promote the good bringing up of children and the well-being of the family. As a general principle, it may be laid down that a workman ought to have leisure and rest proportionate to the wear and tear of his strength, for waste of strength must be repaired by cessation from hard work. In all agreements between masters and work people there is always the condition, expressed or understood, that there should be allotted proper rest for soul and body. To agree in any other sense would be against what is right and just, for it can never be just or right to require on the one side, or to promise on the other, the giving up of those duties which a man owes to his God and to himself. 43. We now approach a subject of great importance, and one in respect of which, if extremes are to be avoided, right notions are absolutely necessary. Wages, as we are told, are regulated by free consent, and therefore the employer, when he pays what was agreed upon, has done his part and seemingly is not called upon to do anything beyond. The only way, it is said, in which injustice might occur would be if the master refused to pay the whole of the wages, or if the workman should not complete the work undertaken. In such cases the public authority should intervene and see that each obtains his due, but not under any other circumstances. 44. To this kind of argument a fair-minded man will not easily or entirely assent. It is not complete, for there are important considerations which it leaves out of account altogether. To labor is to exert oneself for the sake of procuring what is necessary for the various purposes of life, and chief of all for self-preservation. In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread. Hence, a man's labor necessarily bears two notes or characters. First of all, it is personal, inasmuch as the force which acts is bound up with the personality and is the exclusive property of him who acts, and further, was given to him for his advantage. Second, man's labor is necessary, for without the result of labor man cannot live, and self-preservation is a law of nature, which it is wrong to disobey. Now, were we to consider labor merely in so far as it is personal, doubtless it would be within the working man's rights to accept any rate of wages whatsoever. For in the same way as he is free to work or not, so is he free to accept a small wage or even none at all. But our conclusions must be very different if, together with the personal element in a man's work, we consider the fact that work is also necessary for him to live. These two aspects of his work are separable in thought, but not in reality. The preservation of life is the bounden duty of one and all, and to be wanting therein is a crime. It necessarily follows that each one has a natural right to procure what is required in order to live, and the poor can procure that in no other way than by what they can earn through their work. 45. Let the working man and the employer make free agreements, and in particular let them agree freely as to the wages. Nevertheless, there underlies a dictate of natural justice more imperious and ancient than any bargain between man and man, namely, that wages ought not to be insufficient to support a frugal and well-behaved wage earner. If through necessity or fear of a worse evil the workman accept harder conditions because an employer or contractor will afford him no better, he is made the victim of force and injustice. In these and similar questions, however, such as, for example, the hours of labor in different trades, the sanitary precautions to be observed in factories and workshops, etc., in order to supersede undue interference on the part of the state, especially as circumstances, times, and localities differ so widely, it is advisable that recourse be had to societies or boards, such as we shall mention presently, or to some other mode of safeguarding the interests of the wage earners, the state being appealed to, should circumstances require, for its sanction and protection. 46. If a working man's wages be sufficient to enable him comfortably to support himself, his wife, and his children, he will find it easy, if he be a sensible man, to practice thrift, and he will not fail, by cutting down expenses, to put by some little savings, and thus secure a modest source of income. Nature itself would urge him to this. We have seen that this great labor question cannot be solved save by assuming as a principle that private ownership must be held sacred and inviolable. The law, therefore, should favor ownership, and its policies should be to induce as many as possible of the people to become owners. 47. Many excellent results will follow from this, and first of all, property will certainly become more equitably divided, for the result of civil change and revolution has been to divide cities into two classes, separated by a wide chasm. On one side, there is the party which holds power because it holds wealth, which has its grasps on the whole of labor and trade, which manipulates for its own benefit and its own purpose all the sources of supply, and which is not without influence even in the administration of the commonwealth. On the other side, there is the needy and powerless multitude, sick and sore in spirit, and ever ready for disturbance. If working people can be encouraged to look forward to obtaining a share in the land, the consequence will be that the gulf between vast wealth and sheer poverty will be bridged over, and the respective classes will be brought nearer to one another. A further consequence will result in the great abundance of the fruits of the earth. Men always work harder and more readily when they work on that which belongs to them. Nay, they learn to love the very soil that yields in response to the labor of their hands. Not only food to eat, but an abundance of good things for themselves and those that are dear to them. That such a spirit of willing labor would add to the produce of the earth and to the wealth of the community is self-evident. And a third advantage would spring from this: men would cling to the country in which they were born, for no one would exchange his country for a foreign land if his own afforded him the means of living a decent and happy life. These three important benefits, however, can be reckoned on only provided that the man's means be not drained and exhausted by excessive taxation. The right to possess private property is derived from nature, not from man, and the state has the right to control its use in the interest of the public good alone, but by no means to absorb it altogether. The state would therefore be unjust and cruel if, under the name of taxation, it were to deprive the private owner of more than is fair. 48. In the last place, employers and workmen may of themselves effect much in the matter we are treating, by means of such associations and organizations as afford opportune aid to those who are in distress, and which draw the two classes more closely together. Among these may be enumerated societies for mutual help, various benevolent foundations established by private persons to provide for the workmen, and for his widow and orphans, in case of sudden calamity and sickness, and in the event of his death, and institutions for the welfare of boys and girls, young people, and those more advanced in years. 49. The most important of all are working men's unions, for these virtually include all the rest. History attests what excellent results were brought about by the artificers' guilds of olden times. They were the means of affording not only many advantages to the workmen, but in no small degree of promoting the advancement of art, as numerous monuments remain to bear witness. Such unions should be suited to the requirement of this our age, an age of wider education, of different habits, and of far more numerous requirements in daily life. It is gratifying to know that there are actually in existence not a few associations of this nature, consisting either of workmen alone or of workmen and employers together. But it were greatly to be desired that they should become more numerous and more efficient. We have spoken of them more than once. Yet it will be well to explain here how notably they are needed, to show that they exist of their own right, and what should be their organization and their mode of action. 50. The consciousness of his own weakness urges man to call in aid from without, to read in the pages of the Holy Writ. It is better that two should be together than one, for they have an advantage of their society. If one fall, he shall be supported by the other. Woe to him that is alone, for when he hath fallen, he hath none to lift him up. And further, a brother that is helped by his brother is like a strong city. It is this natural impulse which binds men together in civil society, and it is likewise this which leads them to join together in associations which are, it is true, lesser and not independent societies, but nevertheless real societies. 51. These lesser societies and the larger society differ in many respects, because their immediate purpose and aim are different. Civil society exists for the common good, and hence is concerned with the interests of all in general, albeit with individual interests also in their due place and degree. It is therefore called a public society, because by its agency, as St. Thomas of Aquin says, men establish relations in common with one another in the setting up of a commonwealth. But societies which are formed in the bosom of the commonwealth are styled private, and rightly so, since their immediate purpose is the private advantage of the associates. Now a private society, says St. Thomas Aquinas, is one which is formed for the purpose of carrying out private objects, as when 2 or 3 enter into partnership with the view of trading in common. Private societies, then, although they exist within the body politic and are severally part of the commonwealth, cannot nevertheless be absolutely, and as such, prohibited by the public authority, for to enter into a society of this kind is the natural right of man, and the state has for its office to protect natural rights, not to destroy them. And if it forbids its citizens to form associations, it contradicts the very principle of its own existence, for both they and it exist in virtue of a like principle, namely, the natural tendency of man to dwell in society. 52. There are occasions, doubtless, when it is fitting that the law should intervene to prevent certain associations, as when men join together for purposes which are evidently bad, unlawful, or dangerous to the state. In such cases, public authority may justly forbid the formation of such associations, and may dissolve them, if they already exist. But every precaution should be taken not to violate the rights of individuals, and not to impose unreasonable regulations under pretense of public benefit, for laws only bind when they are in accordance with right reason, and hence with the eternal law of God. 53. And here we are reminded of the confraternities, societies, and religious orders which have arisen by the Church's authority and the piety of Christian men. The annals of every nation down to our own day bear witness to what they have accomplished for the human race. It is indisputable that on grounds of reason alone such associations, being perfectly blameless in their objects, possess the sanction of the law of nature. In their religious aspect, they claim rightly to be responsible to the Church alone. The rulers of the state accordingly have no right over them, nor can they claim any share in their control. On the contrary, it is the duty of the state to respect and cherish them, and, if need be, to defend them from attack. It is notorious that a very different course has been followed, more especially in our own time. In many places the state authorities have laid violent hands on these communities, and committed manifold injustices against them. It has placed them under control of the civil law, taken away their rights as corporate bodies, and despoiled them of their property. In such property the Church had her rights. Each member of the body had his or her rights, and there were also the rights of those who had founded or endowed these communities for a definite purpose, and furthermore, of those for whose benefit and assistance they had their being. Therefore we cannot refrain from complaining of such spoliation as unjust and fraught with evil results. And with all the more reason do we complain, because at the very time when the law proclaims that association is free to all, we see the Catholic societies, however peaceable and useful, are hampered in every way, whereas the utmost liberty is conceded to individuals whose purposes are at once hurtful to religion and dangerous to the commonwealth. 54. Associations of every kind, and especially those of working men, are now far more common than heretofore. As regards many of these, there is no need at present to inquire whence they spring, what are their objects, or what the means they imply. Now, there is a good deal of evidence in favor of the opinion that many of these societies are in the hands of secret leaders, and are managed on principles ill, according with Christianity and the public well-being, and that they do their utmost to get within their grasp the whole field of labor, and to force working men either to join them or to starve. Under these circumstances, Christian working men must do one of two things: either join associations in which their religion will be exposed to peril, or form associations among themselves and unite their forces so as to shake off courageously the yoke of so unrighteous and intolerable an oppression. No one who does not wish to expose man's chief good to extreme risk will for a moment hesitate to say that the second alternative should by all means be adopted. 55. Those Catholics are worthy of all praise, and they are not a few, who, understanding what the times require, have striven by various undertakings and endeavors to better the condition of the working class by rightful means. They have taken up the cause of the working man, and have spared no effort to better the condition both of families and individuals, to infuse a spirit of equity into the mutual relations of employers and employed, to keep before the eyes of both classes the precepts of duty and the laws of the gospel, that gospel which, by inculcating self-restraint, keeps men within the bounds of moderation, and tends to establish harmony among the divergent interests and the various classes which compose the body politic. It is with such ends in view that we see men of eminence meeting together for discussion, and for promotion of concerted action, and for practical work. Others again strive to unite working men of various grades into associations, helping them with their advice and means, and enable them to obtain fitting and profitable employment. The bishops on their part bestow their ready good will and support, and with their approval and guidance many members of the clergy, both secular and regular, labor assiduously in behalf of the spiritual interests of the members of such associations. And there are not wanting Catholics blessed with affluence, who have, as it were, cast in their lot with the wage earners, and who have spent large sums in founding and widely spreading benefit and insurance societies, by means of which the working man may without difficulty acquire through his labor not only many present advantages, but also the certainty of honorable support in days to come. How great such manifold and earnest activity has benefited the community at large is too well known to require us to dwell upon it. We find therein grounds for most cheering hope in the future. Provided always that these associations we have described continue to grow and spread, and are well and wisely administered, the state should watch over these societies of citizens banded together in accordance with their rights, but it should not thrust itself into their peculiar concerns and their organization. For things move and live by the Spirit inspiring them, and may be killed by a rough grasp of a hand from without. 56. In order that an association may be carried on with unity of purpose and harmony of action, its administration and government should be firm and wise. All such societies, being free to exist, have the further right to adopt such rules and organizations as may best conduce to the attainment of their respective objects. We do not judge it possible to enter into minute particulars touching the subject of organization. This must depend on national character, on practice and experience, on the nature and aim of the work to be done, on the scope of the various trades and employments, and on other circumstances of fact and of time, all of which should be carefully considered. 57. To sum up then, we may let it down as a general and lasting law that workingmen's associations should be so organized and governed as to furnish the best and most suitable means for attaining what is aimed at. That is to say, for helping each individual member to better his condition to the utmost in body, soul, and property. It is clear that they must pay especial and chief attention to the duties of religion and morality, and that social betterment should have this chiefly in view. Otherwise, they would lose wholly their special character, and end by becoming little better than those societies which take no account whatever of religion. What advantage can it be to a working man to obtain by means of a society material well-being, if he endangers his soul for lack of spiritual food? What doth it profit a man if he gains the whole world and suffer the loss of his soul? This, as our Lord teaches, is the mark or character that distinguishes the Christian from the heathen. After all these things do the heathen seek. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his justice, and all these things shall be added unto you. Let our associations then look first and before all things to God. Let religious instruction have therein the foremost place, each one being carefully taught what is his duty to God, what he has to believe, what to hope for, and how he is to work out his salvation. And let all be warned and strengthened with special care against wrong principles and false teachings. Let the working men be urged and led to the worship of God, to the earnest practice of religion, and among other things, to the keeping holy of Sundays and holy days. Let him learn to reverence and love Holy Church, the common mother of us all, and hence to obey the precepts of the Church, and to frequent the sacraments, since they are the means ordained by God for obtaining forgiveness of sin and leading a holy life.